Good evening, everyone. As I promised last night, I was going to come back and just talk a little bit more about suspension, short-term and long-term. Last night, I kind of gave the rules of suspension for suspension in school, some of the guidelines that the school must follow, as well as the meaning and understanding of short-term and long-term suspension. And for some reason, it didn't upload. So tonight, I decided to do it again. and try to give you a better version at the same time. So the reason for the video is that a lot of phone calls have come in since before the Christmas break regarding preschoolers, kindergartners, junior high, middle school, high schoolers being suspended and expelled. And I wanted to give parents their own set of tools to be able to combat this epidemic called school suspension. I am only a parent. I do have several committees that I represent. I am the president of the Syracuse chapter of the National Action Network, and I also run my own business called the Hotep Resource Center, which is an advocacy center for parents and adults experiencing educational issues such as suspensions or issues with their IEPs. My experience comes from my own children, family members, friends, advocating for them successfully over the years, and being able to keep kids in school, make sure that they get their educational needs met under a free and appropriate public education, and that parents become armed with this toolbox of understanding the code of conduct for every school and how these infractions can lead to suspensions. As I opened with a pictorial, I just wanted to let you see that in Syracuse, we are currently under the guise of the New York State Attorney General because we had one of the highest suspension rates in the nation. And I'll show you some stats in a little bit, but we worked feverishly to get the Department of Education and others to look into this. And luckily, our state attorney general took this on and seen that we weren't making up anything and that we had the highest rate or one of the highest rates in the entire nation, which is pretty bad compared to the size of Syracuse to some of the other cities that have high suspension rates, and to see that our disparities are in some areas 10 times higher than those. It's appalling. So some of the phone calls that we got was from the school district right here in Syracuse. However, quite a bit of them were from surrounding school districts. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that suspension is an epidemic for Black students. African American students seem to be twice as likely to be suspended in Syracuse and across the country. It's even higher in some rate than their counterparts from other ethnic backgrounds. And we talk about the school to prison pipeline, and it's getting younger and younger as I'm seeing 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds being suspended for nonviolent issues, but definitely being suspended. So that's why I wrote this book called Suspended for Life. If you can get a copy, get a copy. There's a great appendix in the back that'll help you out with some of the things that you may be encountering. But I just wanted to go there for a minute and just talk a little bit about suspension. So again, last night I wanted to inform you a little bit about in-school suspension, which is also a form of suspension, and it is a suspension that will go on your child's record. So you want to address these whenever you know about them and as soon as you know about them. For an in-school suspension, as you see here, you're not entitled to a full hearing pursuant to education law, which is New York State Education Law 3214. However, the student and the student's parents will be and should be provided with a reasonable opportunity for an informal conference with district official imposing the in-school suspension. So of course you would want to know why your child was sent to in-school suspension, to ensure that the behavior doesn't surface again, but really to find out, what's going on in the classroom that may be causing him not to be able to focus, learn, so forth and so on. And I'm clearly not talking about having special needs. I'm talking about there could be other classroom disruptions. There could be a lack of classroom management skills, but there still needs to be looked into at any rate, because again, this is a suspension that will go on your child's record. And I do have a record of a student who is about 7 years old in the second grade who was suspended more than they were in school. I'm going to scan that in, but I'll save that for tomorrow. So as we know, suspension from school is a very severe penalty because your child is treated as if their infraction in some cases is treated as if they have broken or committed a crime. So we just want to be really, really careful about and pay attention to the severity of school suspension. So the suspending authority is going to be the principal, the superintendent, or the principal's designee. So whenever you see suspending authority, you want to make sure that you understand that it could be the vice principal if the principal isn't there, and you want to make sure that you have what you need to be able to contact them and appeal. So a short-term suspension, 5 days or less, suspension from school, is when the principal proposes to suspend a student charged with misconduct for 5 days or less pursuant to Education Law 3214, Section 3. The suspending authority must immediately notify the student orally. If the student denies the misconduct, the suspending authority must provide an explanation of the basis for the proposed suspension. The suspending authority must also notify the student's parents, guardians of the basis of the proposed suspension. The notice shall provide a description of the charges against the student and the incident for which the suspension is proposed, and shall inform the parents of the right to request an immediate informal conference with the principal. Both the notice and informal conference shall be in the dominant language of the mode of communication used by the parents at the conference. The parents shall be permitted to ask questions of complaining witnesses under such procedures as the principal may establish. So in this section right here, it is describing your rights as a parent and your students' rights, and the notification rights, because there's due process in all of this, that the student must be allowed to know immediately what he is being or proposed to be suspended for. Notify that has to happen orally, or should happen orally and immediately. If the student denies the misconduct, the suspending authority must explain the basis for the proposed suspension, and then must also notify the student's parent or guardian for the basis or of the basis for the proposed suspension. It's very important that you keep a phone number on file that actually works in case of emergency, or address, and I'll get to that a little bit when we look at a notice that has went out. The notice shall provide a description of the charges against the student and the incident for which the student is proposed. It can be a simple sentence in the middle of the suspension letter, but there still has to be a document outlining these things: your right to an informal conference. And if you, the parent, do not speak English, it must be in the dominant language or mode of communication used. You will be permitted to ask questions, and the principal will set up that procedure. So when you're looking at it, you must really pay attention to how long you have to ask for certain things and how a suspension is made. Unless the student's presence in school poses a continuing danger to persons or property, or an ongoing threat, the student must be removed immediately. If the student's presence does not pose a danger of disruption, the notice and opportunity for the informal conference shall take place as soon after the suspension as is reasonably practicable. So it could happen if your student doesn't have to leave the building right away. When you get there, it can happen. You can take the time when you get there to set it up. I would ask you to take the time when you get there to set it up for the next morning, for later on that day if you need to, just to give you a chance to talk to your student outside of everyone else being there, get their version, get them to write it down, have them identify witnesses, whoever was in the hallway, so that you're starting from a better basis, not from just walking into something that you don't know much about. So when you are looking to, let me just see what I have up here for a minute. When you are looking at suspensions, as we looked at, you should receive a letter. But let's just say that this is the letter that you received. And this is a short-term suspension. So this came from a middle school right here where I'm from, and as you see, it'll say the school district superintendent of schools. I redacted some of it, so I didn't want to put personal information in here about a student. So as you see here, it identifies the date, and this did have the address of the parent in here. Dear parent or guardian of the name of your child, in accordance with the Syracuse City School District Code of Conduct, your child is being suspended from school for 5 days starting on these dates. In 2013, is being suspended for behavior stated below, which is in violation of the school's rules and is considered dangerous and or disruptive, assault with physical injury. Your son or daughter has the right to an informal conference with me, at which time he or her can give her version of events. You may ask questions of complaining witnesses. If you wish to have a conference, please call and they'll list their phone number. It also tells you that while your child is suspended, they may attend positive alternative to suspension program. Now, your school may not have one of those, but they have to allow for your child to continue to get instruction even while suspended in the classes that they're actually in. Not enrichment, but instruction. So your school district has some sort of program that allows your student to receive a tutor or a teacher or some sort of instruction off-site of the school, on the site of the school, while they are suspended, so they don't fall too far behind. And you must make sure that happens, because I've seen a lot of cases where that has been just left right out, and a child has been home from a short-term suspension that is now being recommended to a long-term suspension and has no way of doing anything to make sure that they can advocate for their child to receive the work. By the time their child gets work, they're so far behind that it's just impossible to catch up in a short period or before the end of the marking period. So this is an example of a letter that you should get signed by the principal at the time of suspension, and you don't want to leave the school unless you have that in your hand, because it starts a countdown for what you can do as an appeal or what you may not be able to do as an appeal. So this is another letter stating a suspension, but this suspension is kind of tricky. As you see here, same concept. I took out a lot of the information because this child student was suspended for 5 days starting on October 17th, and it mentioned that the behavior was a minor altercation that was an assault. Student involved in a physical altercation during lunch. Doesn't tell you much about what happened, how it happened, but from here it could seem like something extremely serious. And again, any suspension is extremely serious, so don't take it lightly at all. And you see again that your son has a right to an informal conference. Well, it's actually an informal conference at that time, but I'm going to show you something within this letter which led us to know that it was going to be he was going to be giving more days even after this 5 days was up. So the learning aspect of it, the being able to attend the positive alternative to suspension program to be able to get your classwork done is in there. So that is something that you want to follow up on immediately, getting the work that the child is has a right to receive while even on suspension. But this clause in here, I have referred this matter to the superintendent of schools to consider further suspension or discipline. So this is indicating that the principal or the suspending authority within the school has asked the superintendent to extend the short-term suspension into a long-term suspension. So extending or asking for an extension of suspension is what this is exactly done. I have referred this matter to the superintendent of schools to consider further suspension/discipline. You will receive a notice from the superintendent regarding the procedure which will be followed. So again, making sure that you understand that when this clause is in there, that there's going to be a long-term suspension, even though it started at a 5-day suspension. And as we go on through the weeks and through the days, as we post videos, we will get into some of the things that can happen that your child can't, the maximum and minimum days that a child can be suspended, what is an alternative educational or interim alternative educational setting, and those type of things. But right now I'm going to just stick on suspension. So let's just say that you don't get any of these letters at all from your school, right? You don't receive any of these letters at all from your school. So if you don't, then what can you do? Because one of the things that you can do is on the short-term suspension is make sure that you are able to respond to the suspension letter that you've received. Or if you haven't received a letter, what do you do? What if you don't agree with the reason why your child is being bear with me. So what happens if you're if you didn't receive any of that, right? So in my book, sorry about that, but in my book, I made sure that parents have a way to appeal. So let's say that your child just comes home and says, "Mom, I've been suspended." So you can write your own letter telling the principal that you aren't satisfied with the suspension, that you need to know more information about it, and you simply put the principal's name in, and you can get his email address off of the school's website. Most schools have a website and list an email address for the principal, and you just simply email your letter to the principal and make sure you follow up with a phone call the next morning. So it's your principal's name, school name and address, your pupil's name, on whatever date in 2018, 17, your child was suspended in school or out of school for however many days for the alleged charges of, let's just say, insubordination. On this date, I called the school on 2018 and I spoke to the secretary or the vice principal or the principal at the name of the school about the matter and was told. You want to insert the date that the student could return. You explain that you do not agree with the suspension, the allegations charged, or the lack of a formal investigation into the matter. You also are not satisfied with the decision to suspend your child for however many days. as she is missing valuable, or he or she is missing valuable instruction time. This letter serves to request an appeal of my child's suspension and request a formal meeting or informal meeting to discuss these matters. So today I wanted to put these things up here because last night, even though the video didn't load, I couldn't find the appeal letter. The camera that I was using was moving quite a bit, so I wanted just to give you the ability to see this for a short-term suspension. But the long-term suspension piece, the due process procedures, again, making sure that you're aware of that, has some timelines and dates in it. So a suspension more than 5 days, reasonable notice shall be given to the student and the student's parents to their right to a fair hearing. At the, notice there's a difference between an informal conference and the right to a fair hearing. You can still ask the principal for a informal conference before this, but it won't waive your right to have a fair hearing. At the hearing, the student shall have the right to be represented by counsel, the right to question witnesses against him or her, and the right to present witnesses or other evidence on his or her behalf. You as a parent are entitled to be a part of that your child is a minor. If you can't afford counsel, then you have the right to be there to assist your child or to represent your child. And again, get a copy of the Code of Conduct. It's very important that we become intimate with the school's codes of conduct. The Code of Conduct is the leading policy for the school, for the students. It tells the school's responsibility and the student's responsibility, but it's highly informative around behavior, consequences, and infractions. And a lot of times, if you match up what your child has been suspended for in the Code of Conduct, it may be a whole lot different. It may be a non-suspendable item, and it may give you a leg to stand on in keeping your child in school, stopping the school to prison pipeline, or being suspended for life. I titled that book Suspended for Life because in all of the work that I've done, I found out that one suspension could lead to a lifetime of suspensions and could affect you in your lifetime of getting jobs, getting in school, and lead to unemployment and crime. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because we don't want to become familiar with the book. So parents, if you don't have this book, go online to your school's website, download it. If you can't, email me at hotepresourcecenter.com. Again, that's HOTEPRESOURCECENTER.com. And I'll provide you with a copy of your school's Code of Conduct if you can identify that. I think I gave you the wrong email. I think I gave you the website, but the website isn't going to get you connected to me, having some technical issues with that. So the email is Hotep Resource Center, all one word, @gmail.com. Again, that's Hotep Resource Center @gmail.com. So again, if you need a copy of the Code of Conduct and you can't find it on your school's website, I'm willing to help you with finding that. So again, the superintendent shall personally hear and determine the proceedings. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. He or she may appoint a hearing officer to conduct the hearing, as it says right here. And that hearing officer is supposed to be in advisory capacity only. But the hearing officer is advised to administer oaths, issue subpoenas in conjunction with the proceeding. There is supposed to be a recorded version of or transcript of the hearing. So if there's no stenographer, they can use a tape recorder as a satisfactory method required to satisfy that piece of education law. The hearing officer shall make findings of fact and recommendation as to the appropriate measure of discipline to the superintendent. Now, if you want to appeal this decision, if it comes back unfavorably, you have to act pretty fast, and the appeal will go to your Board of Education, and it has to be received within 30 calendar days of the superintendent's decision. So you have to make sure that you become aware of these procedural due process requirements, because even if you are doing what you are supposed to do, it may be that the school did not identify to you in the manner that they needed to identify to you. What it doesn't say in here is that now you have to be served these papers by mail, in person, and they have to, certified mail, be able to verify that you received this paperwork. And what's been happening as of recent here is that a student was suspended, or several students were suspended the day before the Christmas break. And on January 2nd, when they were supposed to return to school, they received a phone call stating that their suspension was going to be longer termed, or they still hadn't received any documents at all, and that's illegal. So you want to make sure that you follow up on that. And I want to thank you for your time. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at hotepresourcecenter@gmail.com. Thank you very much. I hope this has been educational for you, and good night.